The garage is vast, air thick with burnt oil and the rhythmic, heavy clang of metal. Rachel Turner slams a greasy, tattered rag onto the steel table. "We don't have time for this," she snaps, eyes burning. Ethan Cole stands perfectly still, an immovable shadow. "You're fired," she says, cold and final. Ethan doesn't argue. He peels off his heavy gloves, placing them neatly on the stained workbench. He turns, walking toward the open doors. Suddenly, a low, violent thumping vibrates through the concrete floor. The deafening roar of a rotor shatters the silence. A massive shadow sweeps across the roof, darkening the entire shop. Everyone freezes. They look up. Ethan Cole is 45 years old, and he carries the quiet weight of a man who has seen more than he talks about. He is a single father, and today, like most days, his 10-year-old son Liam is sitting in the corner of the garage, focused on his homework. To the other mechanics, Ethan is just the guy who checks every bolt twice. But Ethan's hands have a history. For 11 years, he served in a military technical logistics unit. He wasn't a high-ranking officer. He didn't lead charges into battle. He was the man responsible for the heavy-duty mechanical systems that kept the units moving. In the military, a loose bolt doesn't just mean a breakdown. It means a mission failure. He spent over a decade learning that good enough is a dangerous lie. In the desert heat of a deployment or the freezing rain of a logistics hub, Ethan learned that machines don't care about your schedule. They only care about physics. After leaving the service, Ethan transitioned to civilian life, bringing that same rigid discipline to the garage. He became known as the man who was slow but sure. In an industry that prizes speed and high-volume turnover, Ethan was an outlier. He wouldn't just change the oil. He'd check the seals, the gaskets, and the surrounding components. To him, every vehicle was a life support system for the family inside it. The garage had recently been bought by Rachel Turner. At 37, Rachel is sharp, ambitious, and focused entirely on the bottom line. She inherited a business with a solid reputation but low margins, and she is determined to flip it into a high-profit powerhouse. She wants to increase the turnover rate. She wants cars in and out as fast as possible. Efficiency is her god, and the stopwatch is her Bible. On this particular Tuesday, the shop is under immense pressure. A high-profile client, a wealthy developer with a temper to match his bank account, is waiting for a specialized off-road vehicle. It needs to be delivered by 5 p.m., or the garage loses a significant contract that Rachel spent months securing. Rachel is pacing the floor, her heels clicking like a countdown on the concrete, checking her watch every few minutes. Ethan is under that vehicle. He is quiet. He is focused. The world outside the chassis doesn't exist. As he tests the drive shaft, his fingers, calloused and stained with a decade of grease, feel something that no digital scanner would catch. It's not a loud sound, just a faint, irregular vibration, a ghost in the machine. To an untrained ear, it's nothing more than the hum of a powerful engine. To Ethan, it's a warning of impending disaster. He slides out from under the car in his creeper, wiping a thick smudge of grease from his forehead. He knows the timeline. He knows Rachel is stressed. He can feel the heat radiating from her office windows. But he also knows that vibration shouldn't be there. It's a minor imbalance in the transmission shaft, a harmonic resonance that indicates a looming failure. It might hold for 100 miles. It might hold for 1,000, but eventually, under load, it will fail. And when it fails, it will be catastrophic. He stands up, his boots heavy on the concrete. He looks at Liam, who is struggling with a math problem in the corner. Liam gives him a small thumb up, a silent signal of support. Ethan takes a deep breath and walks toward Rachel's office. He knows what he has to say, and he knows she isn't going to like it. The garage is buzzing around them. Impact wrenches are screaming like banshees. Radios are blaring rock music to keep the pace up. But in Ethan's mind, there is only the sound of that irregular vibration. He approaches Rachel. "We have a problem with the off-road unit," he says, his voice low and steady. Rachel stops pacing. She doesn't look at him. She looks at her watch. Her eyes narrow. "The client is coming in less than an hour, Ethan. Tell me it's ready. Tell me I can call him and say the keys are on the desk." Ethan shakes his head slowly. The drive shaft has an abnormal vibration. It's slight, but it's there. I need to pull it, put it on the lathe, and recalibrate the balance. It's not a quick fix. Rachel stares at him, her face reddening, the vein in her temple beginning to throb. Is it broken, Ethan? Did it snap? Is the car unable to drive? Not yet, Ethan replies, but it will be. Under high torque, that vibration will tear the transfer case apart. This is the moment where two worlds collide. The world of civilian profit, where time is money, and the world of military precision, where time is safety. Ethan isn't looking for a promotion or a pat on the back. He doesn't care about the contract. He just wants the machine to be right. Rachel, however, only sees a delay that will cost her thousands. She sees a mechanic who is too stuck in his old, rigid ways to understand how a modern, fast-paced business works. She sees an obstacle. Rachel's voice rises, cutting through the ambient noise of the shop like a knife. The music stops. The wrenches go silent. Ethan, the client is literally on his way. He's 10 minutes out. We are not pulling that shaft. We are not spending hours on a vibration that only you can hear. Ethan stands his ground, his posture as straight as it was on a parade ground. Rachel, we should check it for just 30 more minutes. If I can't find the source, I'll sign off. But it's a safety issue. If that shaft lets go at high speeds on the trail, the damage will be catastrophic. The vehicle could flip. The client is waiting, Rachel shouts, her hands thrown up in exasperation. She gestures to the other mechanics, who have stopped working to watch the confrontation. They look down at their tools, uncomfortable. He paid for a premium service, and he expects his vehicle today. Not tomorrow. Not after your 30 minutes turns into 3 hours. Ethan explains the physics of it. He talks about torque, rotational balance, and the cumulative stress on the drivetrain. He isn't being difficult. He's being a professional. He's trying to protect the customer. He's trying to protect the garage. But Rachel has had enough. To her, Ethan's caution looks like fear. It looks like an obsession with perfection that she can't afford in a competitive market. She feels like her authority is being shredded in front of her entire crew. If she lets him win this argument, she loses control of her shop. We need speed, Ethan, she says, stepping closer to him, her voice trembling with anger. We don't need fear. We don't need your what-if scenarios from the motor pool. This is the real world. We need mechanics who can get the job done on time, every time. Ethan doesn't raise his voice. He never does. That's what makes him so intimidating to people like Rachel. Speed without safety is just a fast way to have an accident, he says quietly. I've seen what happens when people cut corners to save time. I've buried friends because of good enough maintenance. The tension in the room is thick enough to choke on. Liam has stopped doing his homework and is watching his father with wide, worried eyes. He knows that tone in his father's voice. It's the tone of a man who won't budge on his principles. Ethan's calm demeanor only seems to frustrate Rachel more. She sees his refusal to sign off on the vehicle as an act of blatant insubordination. If you can't follow my timeline, Rachel says, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low whisper that carries across the silent garage, then you don't belong in this garage. I need team players, not obstacles. The other workers go silent. They know Ethan is the best mechanic they have. They know he's the one they go to when they can't solve a problem. But they also know Rachel is the one who signs the checks, and she doesn't make empty threats. I won't sign off on a vehicle I know is unsafe, Ethan says, his eyes locked on hers. My signature means something. Rachel doesn't hesitate. The anger has completely taken over. Then don't. Hand me your keys. You're fired, Ethan. Right now. Pick up your tools and get out of my sight. A few employees gasp. One of the senior techs, a man who has worked there for 20 years, starts to say something, but Rachel silences him with a sharp, burning look. Ethan doesn't argue. He doesn't beg for his job or try to explain one last time. He simply nods. It's a clean break. He walks back to his station, the rhythm of his footsteps steady on the concrete. He begins to gather his tools, the high-quality wrenches, the custom-milled sockets, and the specialized gauges he's maintained with religious care for years. Each one has a specific place in his heavy steel chest. Liam walks over to him, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. Are we going, Dad? Yes, son, Ethan says, placing a heavy, comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. We're going. Sometimes doing the right thing means walking away. As Ethan packs, he feels the eyes of the shop on him. There is no joy in the other mechanics' faces. There is only a sense of loss. Rachel is already talking to another mechanic, a younger guy named Marcus, telling him to finish the off-road vehicle, sign the paperwork, and get it out the door. She is moving on. She thinks she solved a problem by removing the slow variable from her equation. She thinks she's finally in control. Ethan closes his heavy tool chest with a solid metallic thud. He rolls it toward the door, the wheels clicking over the expansion joints in the floor. He feels a strange sense of peace, despite the loss of his livelihood. He knows he did the right thing. He knows he can look his son in the eye tonight. Safety is always the most important thing, Liam, Ethan says as they step out into the bright, unforgiving afternoon sun. Never forget that. Once you compromise on your standards, you've lost everything. If you believe that being careful is never a mistake, subscribe to see what happens when the sound of rotors appears over the garage roof. They hadn't even reached the edge of the parking lot when the air itself began to change. It started as a low-frequency thrumming in the chest, the kind of sound you feel in your bones before your ears even register it. Then it grew into a rhythmic, deafening roar that swallowed every other sound in the valley. Dust began to swirl in the lot, dancing in violent miniature tornadoes. Inside the garage, the windows rattled so hard they threatened to shatter in their frames. A Navy Seahawk helicopter, painted in tactical matte gray, banked sharply over the trees, its massive blades slicing through the air with a terrifying power. It didn't just fly, it commanded the space. It descended with military precision, its powerful downwash kicking up a storm of gravel and debris that pelted the side of the garage. It touched down on the adjacent gravel lot, an area that Rachel had ignored for months, but which had been cleared for a landing hours ago through a local government permit she had failed to read. The engines began to wind down, the pitch dropping from a scream to a powerful hum. The side door slid open. 2 men in flight suits and 2 technical officers in Navy fatigues stepped out. They weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying ruggedized laptops, technical manuals, and cases of high-end diagnostic equipment. Inside the garage, Rachel and the staff were frozen in place. They stared through the glass doors, mouths agape. Rachel felt a surge of cold panic. Had the military come to seize the shop? Had something gone horribly wrong with a past contract? She felt the weight of her hasty decisions crashing down on her. The Navy personnel walked straight toward the garage, their boots crunching on the gravel with a purposeful rhythm. Rachel smoothed her shirt, wiped her hands on a clean rag, and stepped out to meet them, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked, her voice shaking, despite her best efforts to sound professional. One of the technical officers, a commander with gray at his temples, checked his tablet. "We're looking for Ethan Cole. He was supposed to meet us here at 1500 hours. Is he on site?" Rachel blinked, her mind racing to connect the dots. "Ethan, I just let him go. Just minutes ago. Is there a problem? Was he involved in something unauthorized?" The commander looked surprised, his eyebrows shooting up. "Let him go? Today?" He exchanged a long, meaningful glance with his colleague. "Ma'am, Mr. Cole is the lead civilian consultant for our new integrated maintenance program. We have a scheduled technical exchange and field test today. This visit has been on the books for 6 months. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her pale and cold. "Consultant? He's a mechanic. A very slow, very difficult mechanic." The commander sighed, a look of disappointment crossing his face. "He was a senior maintenance specialist in the Navy for over a decade. He's one of the few civilians in this state authorized to consult on our high-torque transmission protocols. He wasn't slow, ma'am. He was precise. In our world, precision is the difference between a successful mission and a tragedy. That's why we invited him to share his expertise with our junior technicians. He has a way of feeling a machine that most computers can't replicate." Rachel realized then that the emails she had been ignoring, the ones from a government domain she thought were spam or outdated records from the previous owner, were actually the coordination for this high-level visit. She had fired the man the Navy considered an expert. He, he's still in the parking lot, Rachel stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward Ethan's truck. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and ran. She saw Ethan loading the last of his gear into the back of his old reliable truck. Liam was already in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the massive helicopter. "Ethan, wait, please!" she screamed over the fading whine of the helicopter's turbine. Ethan stopped. He didn't rush. He slowly turned around, his expression as neutral and unreadable as a stone wall. Rachel reached him, breathless, her face flushed with a mix of exertion and shame. "The Navy! They're here for you," she panted, leaning against the side of his truck for support. "The commander, he told me. I didn't know, Ethan. I didn't see the emails." Ethan looked at the officers walking toward them across the lot. He didn't look smug. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't laugh in her face. He just looked tired, like a man who had explained the same truth too many times. "I told you we had a meeting today, Rachel," Ethan said, his voice flat. "It was in the shared calendar. I mentioned it last week. You were too busy looking at the profit projections to listen." The Navy officers reached them and shook Ethan's hand with genuine, deep-seated respect, the kind of respect that is earned in the dirt and the grease, not in an office. "Good to see you again, Cole. We're ready for the walkthrough and the transmission diagnostic if you are. Our boys are eager to see how you handle these civilian units." Ethan looked at Rachel, then back at the officers. He looked at the garage he had poured his soul into for the last year. "I don't work here anymore," he said simply. "I've been terminated for being too slow." The officers looked at Rachel, their expressions turning from professional to ice cold in a heartbeat. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than the roar of the helicopter. "Please," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "Just come back inside. Let's talk about this. I made a mistake. A huge mistake." Ethan didn't do it for the drama. He didn't do it to embarrass her further, though she deserved it. He did it because he had a commitment to the men in those uniforms. He knew that the knowledge he had could save lives, and he wouldn't let a petty dispute get in the way of that. He turned to Liam. "Wait here, okay? This will take a little while. Read your book." He walked back into the garage, not as a fired employee with his head down, but as a subject matter expert with the full weight of the U.S. Navy behind him. There were no medals pinned to his chest, no high-ranking titles on his business card. Just a man who knew exactly how a machine was supposed to work and who refused to let it work any other way. Inside the garage, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The air was charged with a different kind of energy. The Navy technicians didn't care about Rachel's profit margins, her high-profile clients, or her 5 p.m. deadline. They only cared about the integrity of the hardware. They spoke a language of tolerances, heat signatures, and structural fatigue. "Ethan," one of the Navy techs said, pointing to the off-road vehicle that Rachel had tried to rush out. Marcus, the younger mechanic, was standing by it, looking terrified. "Is this the one you were flagged on? The one you mentioned in your preliminary report?" Ethan nodded, walking over to the car. He didn't even need to touch it. "The drive shaft. There's a micro-vibration at 4,000 RPMs. It's a harmonic issue. If you don't catch it now, it'll eat the bearings." The Navy team didn't just take his word for it. They pulled out a laser alignment tool and a high-frequency vibration sensor, equipment that cost more than half the cars in the shop. They set it up in seconds, their movements synchronized and efficient. They ran the diagnostic, the engine roaring as they brought it up to speed. The laptop screen on the workbench flashed, and then a solid bar of light turned a deep, angry red. The commander looked at the data. "He's right. The drive shaft is out of balance by 3 millimeters. It's a manufacturing defect in the internal dampener." He turned to look at Rachel, his gaze piercing. If this vehicle had hit the highway, the vibration would have reached a critical resonance within 50 miles. It would have sheared the mounting bolts. You would have had a total drivetrain failure at 60 miles per hour. On a trail, it would have locked the wheels and sent the vehicle over an edge. Rachel stood in the corner, feeling very small, very young, and very foolish. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:30. If she had fired Ethan and sent that car out as planned, the client would have crashed before his dinner reservation. She would have been responsible for a tragedy. The 30 minutes Ethan had begged for wasn't a delay. It wasn't an obsession. It was a massive, life-saving gift. It saved the client's life. It saved the garage from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that would have ended Rachel's career. It saved her reputation before she even knew it was at risk. There were no explosions. No near-miss accidents caught on camera for the news. Just a red line on a computer screen and the quiet, steady breathing of a man who knew the truth. Rachel watched as Ethan explained the correction process to the Navy techs. He wasn't bragging about being right. He wasn't mocking Marcus or the other mechanics. He was teaching. He showed them how to feel the vibration through the frame with their bare hands, a skill of tactile intuition that no computer, no matter how expensive, can fully replace. She realized then that Ethan's slowness wasn't a lack of efficiency. It was the highest form of efficiency imaginable. It was the philosophy of slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It was doing the job right the first time so you never had to waste a single second doing it a second time, or apologizing for a failure. Liam watched from the doorway, his eyes glowing with a quiet, fierce pride. He didn't need a helicopter to tell him his dad was a hero, but seeing the way these powerful men listened to his father changed the way he saw the world. He saw that knowledge was power. Rachel walked over to Ethan after the Navy team had finished taking their notes and packing their high-tech sensors. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the shop's ventilation. "I thought I was being a leader by pushing for speed. I was just being reckless. 30 minutes would have saved everything. I'm sorry." The Navy officers finished their exchange. They thanked Ethan for his time, shaking his hand one last time with that same unwavering respect. They emphasized how much they valued his real-world, hands-on experience in their ongoing training programs. "People like you keep the fleet moving, Cole," the commander said, pausing at the garage door. "In our world, we don't have the luxury of good enough. We need the best. Don't ever lose that eye for detail. The world needs more people who refuse to look away from a problem." As the helicopter engines roared back to life, the dust storm returned to the parking lot. The massive bird lifted off, tilting its nose down and accelerating over the trees, disappearing into the vast blue sky. The garage felt strangely quiet in its wake, the silence heavy with the lessons of the afternoon. Rachel approached Ethan. She didn't look like the confident, aggressive boss who had stormed around the shop that morning. She looked like someone who had just received a very expensive, very necessary education for free. "Ethan," she said, standing by his tool chest, "I'm sorry, truly. I was focused on the numbers and the deadlines, and I forgot that this business is built on trust. I thought speed was the only way to win in this market." Ethan was carefully putting his gloves back into his tool chest, smoothing out the leather. "Speed is fine," he said, finally looking up at her, "but speed has to follow the truth of the machine. You can't negotiate with physics, Rachel. It doesn't care about your contracts." "I want you to come back," Rachel said, her voice firm, "not just as a mechanic. I want you to be the head of safety and quality control for the entire operation. You set the timelines. If you say a car isn't ready, it doesn't leave. Period. No questions asked. I'll handle the clients. You handle the truth." Ethan looked at Liam, who was waiting patiently by the truck, his backpack in his lap. "I have conditions," Ethan said. "I need flexible hours. I'm a dad first, a mechanic second. I won't sacrifice my time with him for a deadline." "Whatever you need," Rachel agreed immediately, without checking her watch. "We'll make it work. We need you more than you need us." The garage didn't change its appearance overnight, but the culture inside it transformed. They stopped rushing for the sake of rushing. They started checking. They started listening to the machines. And oddly enough, their profits didn't drop. They went up. Customers heard about the Cole standard. They heard about the garage that wouldn't let a car leave unless it was perfect. They were willing to pay more and wait longer for that peace of mind. The helicopter didn't land that day to save Ethan's job. It didn't land to create a Hollywood ending. It landed because Ethan Cole had spent a lifetime earning respect through his unwavering commitment to doing things the right way. The helicopter was just a reminder to everyone else to stop, breathe, and look at the value of a man who refuses to do a job poorly. It was a reminder that excellence isn't a destination, it's a habit. Ethan Cole stayed. He kept his head down. He kept checking every bolt twice, his hands moving with the practiced grace of a master. And every time a new hire felt the urge to cut a corner or rush a job, they just looked at the patch of gravel in the side lot where a Navy helicopter had once stood. They remembered that sometimes the most important thing you can do in this life is wait 30 more minutes to make sure it's right. If you believe that slowing down to do it right is more important than rushing to get it done, subscribe for more stories like this and leave a comment. Have you ever been told you were too careful?